faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, we're diving into the book Karl Marx by British thinker Isaiah Berlin. For Marx, we Chinese are all too familiar. The October Revolution brought Marxism, Leninism to China. Since school days, we've been learning about Marx and his theories. Maybe that's why Marx feels abstract to us, like a god in the clouds. But today's book will help you rediscover Marx as a rich, multidimensional, and great person. The author, Isaiah Berlin, is one of the 20th century's top historians of ideas and liberal intellectuals. Our Sally's Book Talk has covered his work on liberty before. This Karl Marx is Berlin's first academic work and an intellectual biography of Marx. Berlin was just 30 when he wrote this debut. It stunned everyone, showing his talent for explaining complex ideas clearly and linking thinkers' views to their personalities. There's a saying that all great thinkers, living or dead, dwell in an invisible academy, silently exchanging ideas. Berlin himself joins that academy. He converses with the great dead and paints vivid portraits of them. For instance, he describes Marx as having a powerful practical mind, sharp sense of injustice, little sentimentality, and deep disgust for intellectual sophistry and bourgeois ignorance. To him, the former chatter pointlessly, detached from reality, equally annoying whether sincere or not, while the latter are hypocritical, self-deceiving, obsessed with wealth and status, blind to their era's truths. That description cuts deep. The book has another unique aspect tied to Berlin's own stance. As said earlier, Berlin's a famous liberal intellectual, meaning he's not a Marxist and his views directly oppose Marx's. However, serious thinkers never dismiss opposing views due to differing stances. On the contrary, they strive to understand those perspectives, for the realm of thought expands through collision. In this book, Berlin presents Marx with both intellectual resonance and critical objectivity, thus painting a vivid portrait. The book was first published in 1939. World War II had just erupted then, and over 80 years later, our world has transformed dramatically. Yet in the Western world, this remains the finest exposition of Marx's life and thought, unsurpassed to this day. We'll explore this Marx biography through three aspects. First, Marx's tumultuous life journey. Second, his intellectual system, historical materialism, and critique of bourgeois society. Third, Marx's leadership and practice in proletarian revolutionary movements. All right, let's begin with Marx's turbulent life. On May 5, 1818, Marx was born in Trier, Rhineland, Germany, a beautiful medieval town. He was the second of 8 children, with an older sister. Ethnically, Marx was Jewish, but his father, Herschel Levi, abandoned his Jewish identity young, converted to Lutheranism, and adopted the German name Heinrich Marx. Thus, though ethnically Jewish, Marx grew up in a typical German bourgeois family. For most of his life, Marx avoided mentioning his ethnicity and never identified as Jewish. Karl Marx shared a warm, close bond with his father. The elder Marx was an upright and gentle man. He early recognized Karl's exceptional intelligence and curiosity, but worried about his stubbornness and rigidity. In contrast, Karl's relationship with his mother was distant. Uneducated, she never understood his talents, later indifferent even to his survival. Besides his father, young Marx received special affection from another elder, their neighbor, Baron von Westphalen. The Baron greatly adored Karl, encouraging him to read widely and often taking him on woodland walks near town, where he'd recite lengthy passages. After sharing famous excerpts from Cervantes, Shakespeare, and others, Marx maintained lifelong reverence for the Baron, even dedicating his doctoral thesis to him with fervent gratitude. Notably, Marx later became the Baron's son-in-law, marrying his daughter Jenny in 1843. Jenny adored Marx with devotion and trust, while he remained enchanted by her beauty, intellect, and noble background. According to Berlin, Marx was arrogant, combative, and proud, enduring illness, poverty, and political persecution in adulthood. But early warmth from his father, the Baron, and Jenny's companionship gave Marx inner security, shaping him into a resilient, confident individual. Returning to Marx's youth, he left Trier at 17. Following his father's advice, he enrolled in law at the University of Bonn. Soon after, he transferred to the University of Berlin, marking his first major turning point.
Hegel's philosophy had swept Germany, and Berlin, where Hegel spent his final years, was the epicenter of this intellectual storm.
At Berlin University, Marx, though a law student, became spellbound by Hegel's ideas. Plunging obsessively into philosophy, he read and pondered day and night until his health collapsed. His father sent a loving letter, urging him to abandon meaningless philosophy and focus on becoming a lawyer or civil servant. But Marx ignored this, replying he'd create a system rivaling Hegel's philosophy. Marx later earned his doctorate at the University of Jena. In his free time, he joined a club of university intellectuals. They drank beer, wrote incendiary poetry, railed against kings, churches, and the bourgeoisie, and endlessly debated Hegel. Marx quickly gained attention for his erudition and eloquence, attracting his own followers. Like journalist Moses Hess, who described the 20-something Marx in a letter, he is the greatest, perhaps the only true philosopher alive today, combining the wisdom of Rousseau, Voltaire, Holbach, Lessing, Heines, and Hegel. That was Dr. Marx back then. His dream was to become a university philosophy professor. But in 1841, Marx's father died, cutting off his financial support.
Worse, the conservative Prussian government cracked down on radical Hegelian leftists, shutting Marx's academic path completely, forcing him to find new work.
His admirer Hess then helped him secure a job writing for the Rheinische Zeitung newspaper. Within 10 months, Marx became the paper's editor-in-chief. Soon, the paper transformed from moderate liberalism to radical activism, openly criticizing Prussian censorship in parliament. In April 1843, Prussian authorities shut down the Rheinische Zeitung, leaving Marx jobless again. Marx decided to move to France. He felt nothing remained for him in Germany. His father was gone and he had no steady job. Those Berlin drinking buddies now seemed like intellectual charlatans to him, using violent rhetoric and scandalous lives to mask shallow thinking. In November 1843, Marx arrived in Paris. The next 3 years proved decisive for his life. Marx came mainly to study why the French Revolution failed. Seeking answers, he developed his theoretical system, historical materialism. We'll detail this in part 2. In Paris, he also committed to lifelong communism, personally and politically. We'll explore this in part 3. Paris held another special meaning for Marx. There, he found the dearest friend of his life, Friedrich Engels. Marx met Engels in 1844. They became close and intimate almost immediately. Their friendship held no possessiveness or jealousy. They openly expressed loyalty and affection for each other. Though brilliant himself, Engels acted like an eager student around Marx, always reverently absorbing knowledge from Marx, then repaying it with passion, energy, and joy. In Engels, Marx found a loyal friend and intellectual companion. But neither finding Engels nor his groundbreaking ideas changed Marx's dire circumstances. In 1845, Marx was expelled from Paris by France's Guizot government and exiled to Brussels, Belgium. There, Marx and Engels co-authored the famous Communist Manifesto. Yet, because of the manifesto, Belgium expelled Marx too. He then went to Cologne, Germany, to found the Neue Rheinische Zeitung. But a year later, Prussia banned this newspaper as well. Marx himself was arrested for inflammatory writings and faced trial. At the trial, Marx delivered a speech analyzing Germany and Europe's socio-political landscape in detail. His erudition stunned everyone present. The jury foreman acquitted him instantly, thanking Marx personally and on behalf of the entire jury. They thanked him for an exceptionally educational speech. Yet, despite acquittal, Prussian authorities still expelled him. By then, as Berlin put it, Marx was notorious across continental Europe. He left for Britain, arriving in London on August 24, 1849. He planned to stay weeks or months, but never left. In London, Marx's family endured crushing poverty. His notoriety made him unemployable by any respectable institution. With no stable income but a growing family, they kept moving, from cheap lodgings to cheaper, until landing in slums. The family often couldn't afford food, going hungry until Engels' remittances temporarily eased their plight. Under these brutal conditions, 2 sons and a daughter of Marx died successively. In despair, Marx even applied to be a railway ticket clerk, but his shabby clothes and frightening appearance scared the recruiter, who rejected him for illegible handwriting.
Yet amid immense suffering, Marx persisted in his struggle.
Daily he went to the British Museum reading room, staying from 9 a.m. until closing at 7 p.m., then working at home until 2 to 3 a.m., constantly smoking his pipe, a habit that permanently damaged his health. Thus, day after day, he wrote Capital and led the First International Movement. All right, in part 2, we'll focus on Marx's ideas. Marx integrated his economic, sociological, and political views into a unified system. This system later became known as historical materialism. Here, we must distinguish between originality in thought versus art. Artistic originality expresses previously unvoiced personal experiences. Theoretical originality solves problems that were never systematically addressed, let alone solved, and provides a radically new solution. This solution may incorporate past doctrines. Yet as a whole, it's original. Marx's historical materialism is precisely such an original theory. It drew from Western thinkers, its structure from Hegel, the idea that economic relations drive history from French thinker Saint-Simon, materialist primacy from German philosopher Feuerbach, and proletarian perspectives from French communist traditions. Let's focus on the relationship between Hegel's and Marx's philosophies.
This is crucial. Hegel's philosophical system is vast, complex, and intimidating. We'll concentrate on the most essential aspect, philosophy of history.
Hegel believed each era or nation possesses a spirit, and human history is the spirit's evolution. How does it develop then? Through contradiction. Incompatible forces emerge in every era, inevitably clashing and developing through conflict. As these forces strengthen, contradictions escalate until revolution and rupture occur, one force destroying the other. Ultimately, the rupture point triggers sudden sublimation, elevating history to a new plane. Thus, new contradictions form among fresh forces. Hegel termed this endless process dialectics. For Hegel, each major shift in human spirit is marked by massive revolutionary leaps. Examples: Christianity's rise, barbarians sacking Rome, French Revolution, each advancing spirit toward full self-awareness. Through this conflict and revolution, human history progresses toward greater self-realization. Marx adopted Hegel's dialectics, agreeing history is non-repeating development where each moment is novel. But he rejected spirit as history's substance. To Marx, spirit was mysticism, restating problems in obscure terms, not scientific explanation. So what is history's substance? Marx argued explanations must focus on social environment's essence, the socio-economic realm. As he wrote, the anatomy of civil society is to be sought in political economy. Marx held human history is the history of humanity's creative labor development. Humans conquered the world through action and labor, not contemplation. Division of labor emerged from this creativity. Division of labor boosted productivity, accumulating wealth that spawned culture and ultimately divided people into classes. A class refers to a group in society whose position in social production determines certain inevitable relations independent of individual will, matching their material productive forces. The sum of these production relations forms the economic structure of society upon which legal and political superstructures are built. Hegel's dialectics come into play here. When productive forces advance to a stage, they clash with production relations.
This contradiction is essentially a conflict between classes.
When the contradiction reaches a certain point, class struggle erupts, ushering in the era of social revolution. Thus, Marx made his famous claim: the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. He believed humanity's gradual liberation always moves in a definite, irreversible direction. And Every new epoch begins with the liberation of an oppressed class. Building on this historical materialism, Marx turned his fire toward critiquing the bourgeoisie. In his view, bourgeois society represents the ultimate form of class conflict. Why? Because the bourgeois era simplifies class antagonism, splitting society into two hostile camps, bourgeoisie and proletariat. Meaning, only the proletariat remains oppressed. After their struggle with the bourgeoisie ends, class contradictions vanish forever. The proletariat will liberate all humanity by freeing itself, achieving communist freedom, and truly beginning human history. Note that critiquing the bourgeoisie wasn't Marx's invention. It's an old refrain. As early as the 15th century, English utopian socialist Thomas More fiercely criticized sheep-devouring men during the enclosure movement. For over 3 centuries after, European humanist scholars never stopped critiquing the bourgeoisie. But those critiques mostly stayed moral, accusing the bourgeoisie of greed, selfishness, or cruelty. Unlike them, Marx hardly made moral accusations. His writings rarely mentioned moral progress, eternal justice, human equality, or freedom of belief, because he saw these terms as useless, representing only ideological confusion and practical incompetence. To Marx, individuals' goals and actions are determined by their position in the social hierarchy. Social existence determines consciousness. This naturally includes moral consciousness, too. In fact, Marx despised all forms of romanticism, emotionalism, and humanitarianism. He believed he'd uncovered history's essence and laws, needing no moral standards. So how did Marx critique the bourgeoisie? This is concentrated in his masterpiece Capital. Berlin called it the most formidable, sustained, and meticulously crafted assault on bourgeois society ever mounted. Marx dedicated 15 grueling years to this indictment of the entire social order. Capital's central thesis. In bourgeois society, workers produce wealth exceeding their consumption, surplus value. Yet because the bourgeoisie owns production means, they seize and divide this surplus. To boost surplus value, capitalists engage in brutal competition, slashing costs, opening markets, leading to massive corporate consolidation. Ultimately, only the strongest corporations survive. Industrial expansion creates a vast pyramid. Few powerful capitalists at the top, exploited workers and colonial slaves at the base. He was convinced capitalism would inevitably collapse. In Chapter 22 of Capital, Marx penned that iconic passage, "As the number of capitalist magnates decreases, poverty, oppression, degradation, and exploitation increase correspondingly. Simultaneously, the working class grows, disciplined, united, and organized by capitalism itself. Production centralization and labor socialization become incompatible with their capitalist shell. This shell shatters. Capitalist private property's death knell tolls. The expropriators are expropriated." Today, we witness capital's globalization, economic resource centralization, and intensifying contradictions between mass production and outdated distribution models. All this proves the foresight of Marx's ideas. Yet Marx was a great thinker, not a prophet. Looking back at Capital today, we find many of Marx's predictions unfulfilled. His predictions, falling profit rates, concentration of private industry land ownership, global proletarian unity, largely remained unconfirmed. He didn't anticipate states becoming forces resisting or altering capitalist development, meaning he foresaw neither fascism's rise nor welfare states. Yet these errors don't diminish his ideological system's greatness. This greatness manifests in at least 3 dimensions. First, as theory. Unmatched professionalism, rigorously methodological, incisive clarity, perfect balance between detail and macro-level insight. Second, his influence overflowed academia. Revolutionary movements deployed his theories, new social orders professed faith in him. Third, he pioneered modern economics, history, and sociology, altering humanity's intellectual trajectory. All right, having covered Marx the thinker, Part 3 explores Marx the revolutionary mentor. Many imagine revolutionary Marx as a detached scholar immersed in pure theory. Outside his study, revolutions he inspired raged fiercely. Yet he supposedly didn't participate personally. This image is mistaken. Marx passionately engaged in revolutionary practice. Conventionally, explaining history's laws would exceed a philosopher's duty. But Marx was extraordinary. To him, theory and practice must align, belief and action unified. His famous epitaph is engraved on his tombstone.
Philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point is to change it.
After concluding communism required proletarian revolution, he devoted his life to organizing and training workers, becoming the movement's commander.
Throughout his life, he unwaveringly and uncompromisingly believed in the working class's violent revolution. There seems to be a contradiction here. Earlier we said, according to Marx's theory, the bourgeoisie is destined to exit history's stage, an inevitable result of social development laws. If capitalism must fall regardless, why did Marx actively participate in revolution? Marx explained, while proletarian victory is historically inevitable, human courage and wisdom can accelerate it, reduce conflicts, and minimize material waste. To him, the old world was visibly crumbling before his eyes. He aimed to hasten its collapse and shorten the final agony. In 1845, exiled from Paris to Brussels, Marx co-founded the Communist League with Engels. In 1847, London's Central Committee commissioned them to draft a document clarifying the organization's beliefs and goals. Engels wrote the first draft in Q&A format. Marx deemed it insufficiently powerful and rewrote it entirely, completing the Communist Manifesto in early 1848. No modern political manifesto rivals the manifesto's eloquence or force, especially its aphorisms, unmatched by any text. For example, a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. Workers have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Berlin assessed the manifesto's impact as rivaled only by religious texts like the Bible or Quran. If someone wrote only this book, with no other works, it alone would secure eternal fame. The manifesto's publication electrified communists across Europe. Revolutionary cascading tone erupted in Naples, Milan, Rome, and Venice, followed by armed revolts in Berlin, Vienna, and Budapest. Paris, the revolutionary city, descended into fervor. Germans there even formed an army to overthrow Prussia's government. Engels nearly enlisted, but Marx stopped him. Marx distrusted and opposed any fanatical behavior. In his view, untrained exiled intellectuals forming an army were pointlessly wasting revolutionary energy, leading only to ridiculous or regrettable outcomes, plus numb shame and disillusionment. And Marx's suspicion proved justified. Revolts were quickly suppressed by conservative forces, yet this failure didn't shake Marx's faith. To him, a revolutionary leader's primary task was awakening the masses to their destiny and mission. This process might be long and arduous, but without it, people would achieve nothing beyond wasting revolutionary energy. To achieve this, a group more organized and combative than the Communist League was essential. This group must consist of trained revolutionaries. Responding to this call, a radical workers' party formed in Germany. Similar parties or political organizations emerged in France, Britain, and Italy. In 1864, the first International Working Men's Association was founded in London. Marx was appointed to its executive council and soon gained control. He drafted the International's founding declaration.
The declaration stated, the International must be disciplined. Members should aid each other, not just improve living conditions, but systematically destroy capitalism through political action.
Under Marx's leadership, the First International grew rapidly. Branches spread across Western Europe, holding annual congresses. Though Marx rarely attended meetings, international affairs consumed most of his time. He demanded strict adherence to the declaration, especially emphasizing ideological and intellectual training for members. When international delegates visited London, he'd push them into the British Museum reading room, forcing them to study. No other social or political movement emphasized research and erudition so intensely.
In autumn 1870, a major event shook Europe. Napoleon III surrendered in the Franco-Prussian War.
The Second Empire collapsed. A bourgeois republican defense government proclaimed the French Third Republic. However, Prussia continued its attack on France and besieged Paris.
The Paris National Guard announced the overthrow of the defense government and elected a People's Revolutionary Committee.
as the new government, known as the Paris Commune. As the siege intensified, people descended into fear and madness. The Commune sentenced and executed many innocents, including the Archbishop of Paris. To other European nations, the Commune supporters seemed like lunatics and murderers. But yet Marx, in the First International's name, issued a manifesto praising the Commune as the working class's historic debut, showcasing idealism and rebellion. He even declared the Commune's replacement of bourgeois government was a transitional social structure, essential for the working class's ultimate liberation.
The article caused an uproar. People called Marx Doctor of Red Terror, sending hate mail.
Some even threatened his life repeatedly, but Marx seemed delighted. In a letter to a friend, Marx wrote, "For 20 years, I lived like a frog in a swamp, a long, dull, rural exile. Now this situation suits me fine. Let them come." Truthfully, Marx didn't need to speak out. The Commune had no ties to the First International, and its theory wasn't even socialist. But by framing the Commune as the working class's first spontaneous uprising, Marx created a socialist heroic legend. 30 years later, when Lenin defended the 1905 Moscow uprising, he cited Marx's Commune evaluation. At crucial moments, creating history matters more than recording it accurately or learning from it. In such moments, commemorating a great heroic uprising, however flawed or destructive, becomes invaluable emotional and symbolic capital for a revolutionary movement. At the time, though, Marx's backing of the Commune permanently damaged the First International. Many members resented him. Since the Commune was seen as lawless murderers, Marx's association brought unnecessary infamy. Well, anti-Marx members rallied around Bakunin. Bakunin was an early Russian proletarian revolutionary. In 1864, he joined the First International. Marx's opponents proposed creating a Bakunin-led subgroup within it, with autonomous structures, a demand Marx found intolerable. Marx insisted the working class's sole power lay in unity. Disunity would reduce revolution to romantic, futile chivalry, leading to weakness and disillusionment. So Marx launched a public offensive, expelling Bakunin and his followers from the First International, succeeding decisively. Yet this expulsion drained the First International's vitality. The Bakunin conflict marked Marx's final public appearance. In 1872, the First International dissolved peacefully. Thereafter, Marx lived reclusively, dedicating most time to theoretical work. Though now socialism's supreme moral, theoretical authority, he noticed followers interpreting his theory mechanically with crude determinism. To this, he quipped wryly, "Whatever else I may be, I am certainly not a Marxist." In 1881, Marx's wife, Jenny, died of cancer. 2 years later, his eldest daughter passed too. Marx never recovered from these blows. On March 14, 1883, after prolonged poverty and illness, Marx died in his sleep at 65. He passed sitting in his study armchair. Few attended his burial at London's Highgate Cemetery. Engels delivered a solemn, moving eulogy honoring Marx's achievements. Its closing line, "His name and work will endure through the ages." Engels was absolutely right. Marx's influence persists today and will endure. Paradoxically, Marx's own theory rejected ideas dominating history. He believed historical laws were immutable to individual intervention. Yet his own ideas profoundly altered and influenced humanity's historical course. As Berlin wrote at the book's conclusion, among academic forces still permanently transforming how people think and act, Marx's ideas remain the most powerful. All right, that concludes our discussion of Karl Marx. You'll find reading notes below the audio. Until next time,